Hey, also, I thought I would try something a little bit different today. Typically, with my content, I do a lot of movie stuff and video game stuff, but there's been an idea that I've had in my mind for a while, and I just wanted to talk about one of my favorite bands of all time. And so I'm doing a little video essay about it, and I hope that you guys enjoy this. Fair warning, there is a lot of music in here, so this may get copyright claimed. Just to be safe, I am going to edit a version without the music and everything as well, in case I need to re-upload it. And if that's the case, then you won't even be seeing this disclaimer. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. And let's talk about one of my favorite bands of all time, I Set My Friends on Fire. What the fuck? So for some context here, before we get into the stuff about I Set My Friends on Fire, I want to talk about the reason why they resonated with me so much as a band. When I was around 11 or 12, I started to fall really deep into depression. And also my anxiety started messing with me. The things have gone hand in hand and have fucked with me my entire life. And so the thing is that, my family and I ended up moving to Longmont, Colorado when I was around 11 or 12. And I had already felt isolated, but moving there just really weighed on me heavily. It was just this weird place where it was like in the middle of being like a big city and like bumfuck nowhere, it was surrounded by farmers and engineers. And around that time, the concept of being emo or scene or alternative or anything like that really wasn't a thing. Which, I don't know if it was a counterculture or what, but when I heard My Chemical Romance's I'm Not Okay for the first time, it changed my life. And I went to FYE and I bought 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, and I listened to that fucking album on repeat nearly every day. I started hanging out on Myspace to make connections with people, and I changed my clothes and I started straightening my hair. As I immersed myself further into the emo and scene culture, I found myself listening to heavier bands. So more stuff like Dr. Acula, The Devil Wears Prada, The Acacia Strain, Born of Osiris, and Beneath the Sky. But I still had an affinity for music that had singing. I love metal, but I also love post-hardcore. And as much as I love listening to music, I really wanted to play it too. So I threw myself into music, and initially I started playing drums, basically just through people that I had met online. Thank God nothing happened to me. I really wouldn't recommend meeting random people that you meet online. But, it was like friends of friends and stuff like that. And so I would play the drums for some bands, but I really always wanted to be a vocalist. And I started to move away from drumming and perform with some other people that, again, I met through mutuals. But the thing is that, those bands that I started, we didn't really take things seriously, and they fell apart pretty quickly. But all of that changed when I started playing music with my friend Connor. My friend Connor and I met in middle school, and in high school is when we started playing music together. It was the first time that I felt like, I actually had somebody that was serious about it and still wanted to have fun, but like we could just bounce ideas off of each other and everything. I guess the hesitation for me was that I didn't really think a duo could make music the way that I wanted to. But that really changed when I heard I Set My Friends on Fire for the first time. And the thing that made it even cooler is that it was actually 2 dudes that looked like me. They were also mixed race. So immediately I was drawn to them because I felt a connection to them, both them making music that I just loved and also them representing me in a scene that's predominantly white. Around 2007, I Set My Friends on Fire was crazy big because of their cover of Crank That Soldier Boy. And they really managed to leverage the platform of MySpace to gain popularity. It was the first example, I think anybody had ever seen. Soldier Boy did it with YouTube with the Crank That dance. And then they were smart enough to capitalize on that and drop the cover of Crank That. I mean, you would go on MySpace and every single fucking profile for kids that were like me at that time, guaranteed they had that song on there. After that, I went and looked for their music. I scoured for it for hours because nobody knew their name was I Set My Friends on Fire. There was a bunch of different people posting and reposting the song with different names on there. But I eventually did find them, and I bought their music on iTunes, and the rest was history. I even went to go see them at their first major show at Denver in the Marquee when they were going on their very first U.S. tour. And the thing is that being inspired by I Set My Friends on Fire, my friend Connor and I started a band called Murder on Jump Street. Excuse me. It was called Murder on Sesame Street, and then eventually it turned into Murder on Jump Street. And we even did a cover of Turn My Swag On. And we did a musical not too dissimilar from the sketch comedy that I Set My Friends on Fire did in the lead up to their album. After playing music for a while, I stopped being there for my friend Connor, and I was a selfish dick. I really focused a little bit too much on the band stuff, and it ruined our friendship. Like, he had stuff going on with his family life. He had a lot of pressure to have like perfect grades, and he was going through a really bad breakup with his girlfriend. And instead of me being a friend and helping him out, I was arguing with him over shit like band names and our image, or, when we were going to play a show or whatever. And, I haven't really talked to him since, and that sucks. And what's crazy to me is that I Set My Friends on Fire broke up around the same time we kind of stopped being friends. But the difference is that Matt Mihana stayed on it and kept making music. I mean, the main reason that I'm really making this video is because at the end of the day, I Set My Friends on Fire had a really strong influence on me as a person, with their music. And I just really want to talk about the history of the band, their influence, where they are now, and where they're potentially going. And to do that, let's go ahead and rewind a bit and talk about their beginnings. Hey, it's your Calvary kids, and we got a new song beyond. Before they were I Set My Friends on Fire, Matt Mihana and Nabil Mu were actually part of a band called We Are the Cavalry. And they were actually a 5-piece band that made more traditional metalcore music. Still really, really good shit. They have some great songs like I Met the Prettiest Yeti at the Shittiest Getty. But that band was pretty short-lived, and I think they only put out, maybe 4 songs before they had ultimately broke up. And one of the cool things is that there was actually a really recent interview from Nabil Mu where he's talking about the origins of I Set My Friends on Fire. And he said that, basically both him and Matt felt constrained being a part of that band, and they just wanted to do whatever they wanted to do. And even Nabil was kind of hesitant to make the Crank That cover. So Matt and Nabil ended up forming a duo, which they initially called the Calvary Kids. And you can even hear that at the start of the Crank That cover. They go, yo, this is the Calvary Kids. But they actually changed to I Set My Friends on Fire shortly after. But what I think is especially funny about the name choice is that there's this band called Aiden, and they have a song called I Set My Friends on Fire. Matt's been pressed about it before, and he said, oh, I fucking hate that band. They literally had nothing to do with that name choice. I just picked it because it sounded cool. And honestly, respect for that. Because, like, I like Aiden a little bit, like their older stuff, but it's a good thing to distance themselves from those dudes because they are pieces of shit. But that's a whole other story for another time. So with I Set My Friends on Fire, Matt Mihana did most of the vocals and wrote the lyrics as well as some of the synth parts, whereas Nabil did all of the guitar work and programmed drums and everything like that. And he also would provide clean vocals on some songs. So after they split and became I Set My Friends on Fire, they released a short EP. So the 2 songs on that EP were ASL and Beauty is in the Eye of the Beer Holder. And, I kind of mentioned it in the start, but it was really difficult to find that EP because of misinformation about the band. I didn't know if they were We Are the Calvary or I Set My Friends on Fire, or there were just like millions of other bands that just tried to pretend it was their song and then got called out on it. Thankfully, they were able to separate themselves from the pack with the music that they made aside from the Crank That cover. And they were signed by the record label Epitaph. Just a quick side note about Epitaph. If you are a fan of pretty much any emo music from the mid to late 2000s, you probably had at least one band that was on Epitaph. I mean, they had From First to Last, Every Time I Die, Escape the Fate. If you were into metal, they even had I Killed the Prom Queen. They had hardcore like Converge. They were a juggernaut. Even now, they still have some pretty prolific bands like La Dispute on there. Definitely, Epitaph was one of the top labels to be on at the time. And under Epitaph, in 2008, they dropped their first album, You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter. Now, what I find, especially crazy about this album is that when it first came out, it had a ton of mixed reviews.
All about?
A lot of people were saying that it was mid or generic or whatever, but I really think that it was a unique mix of catchy choruses, humor, synths, and heavy breakdowns, and Matt's lyricism was just insane. The dude has an immaculate vocabulary. I've never heard anybody else come up with lyrics like his, but they resonate with me in a weird way. And the thing that was especially cool is that leading up to the release of You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter, they actually released a web series about them living with an alien on YouTube as a promotional tool.
Oh, so you're a singer?
Yeah, I sing a bit, yeah.
Why don't you sing something for me?
Oh, no, I'm too shy. I can't.
Come on, it'd be cool. I want to hear you.
Okay, alright.
This was still around the time that YouTube was starting to get to a wider audience, around 2008. That's when a ton of people were just flocking there for a bunch of sketch comedy. So they were hitting on 2 fronts. They were hitting on the MySpace social media front, and then they were also hitting it on the front of YouTube. So they were getting their name, their face, and their music out there all at the same time. Back to the album itself, like I said, Matt's vocals and lyricism were insane. His vocals are so unique. He's got these really insane highs and really great lows. And in his lyrics, he uses a lot of alliteration and abstraction throughout the album. And he kind of channels the angst of the generation that we were a part of. It was weird navigating the world through these computer screens. He also talks about things like failed relationships and the nature of conformity and, coming to your own personal truths when confronted by others with wildly different viewpoints on things.
What the hell is wrong with him? There's so long and he's a trim. I heard he passed a lot in those rumors. And probably too like all the other rumors. You think about it, but then they won't live. It just won't last. Everything you will be. Nothing I
He just sums them up so succinctly. And it's light, but it's also a lot heavier than you may think. I'm not going to go in depth into the lyrics, as that's not what this video is about. But I do strongly suggest that you check them out if you're interested, because they're really just interesting to read. They're almost like poems. And I think that overall, You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter really encapsulates the MySpace era of social media neatly, especially for people that were teenagers around that time. All the way from the music to the lyrics to the packaging, to the way it was presented to us. It was kind of showing there's, this version of ourselves that we present to others versus the internal self. You have this idea of who you are that you craft and you show other people, but that's maybe not who you actually are when you're alone. And the thing is that there are even these like moments of levity on the album, like Crank That and Hardcore Two Step, which are, quote unquote joke songs. I really feel like they're there to break up the bleakness and kind of be like, I'm just kidding. Like, like same type of thing. Like kids posting on MySpace, like, oh, I'm going to friggin' unalive myself, and then turning around and then making a bad joke. Like, I know so many people like that. And even again, the album art, similar to that concept. The cover art is a narwhal jumping out of pink intestines. It's this bright neon, ridiculous looking cover, but then it's like you look closer and it's a sea of guts with this real but somehow also mythical creature on it. It's just awesome. I can't heap enough praise on that album. But after You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter dropped, shortly after that, I Set My Friends on Fire collaborated with Smosh. And at the time, Smosh was one of the biggest YouTube channels, and they were one of my favorites at the time. And they released 2 songs. Those 2 songs being Sex Ed Rocks and 4 Years Foreplay. Sex Ed Rocks is obviously about sex education. And 4 Years Foreplay was a song about the woes of being a high school student entering their freshman year and the differences you see there. Lyrically, they weren't really as in-depth as the songs on the album, but they were still really fun, and that collaboration was just another way to send them even higher in popularity, with maybe people that probably wouldn't have listened to their music traditionally. Then after those tracks with Smosh dropped, Chris Lent joined the band in 2010 as their drummer and to help with some production elements as well, just to make it even smoother for when they were going in for their next album. But the really sad thing is that around that time, Nabil ended up splitting from the band as well. He initially cited, and I believe there was a MySpace post about this, but I could be completely wrong. But ultimately, he said that he wanted to pursue other creative endeavors, mainly filmmaking and photography. And at a later point in time, Matt Mihana made a statement saying that Nabil left because he wanted to finish school and spend more time with his family.
I think he just, wants to go to school and be with his family. Like, it's kind of hard to tour, like, constantly and be away from your family and shit. So, I guess, it just wasn't for him.
Okay. Which is totally understandable. Like, being in a band, even just like a local band and playing shows and different things like that is already tough. But to be a band on a national level, especially with only 2 people, it's a lot easier for things to fall apart than it is, for you to stick together. With the breakup of I Set My Friends on Fire, more specifically, Nabil leaving the band, Astral Rejection was pushed back from, I believe, its original release date of 2010 to sometime in 2011. And the finished product that we got, overall I enjoyed, but it was way more experimental than their first album. There were still some more traditional tracks on there, like the title track, Astral Rejection, Excite Dyke, and It Comes Naturally. And what I do appreciate is that in a sort of send-off for the band, Nabil did come back and direct the music video for It Comes Naturally, with that being the first single of the band. So it felt like, hey, I'm leaving, but like we're still on good terms type of thing. Astral Rejection did have a way darker vibe than You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter. You could really feel the clash between Matt and Nabil's sensibilities in the album, and that there was a fracture between the band. The lyrics and the themes in the album were darker, and, it was talking more about things like substance abuse and infidelity and even like eldritch horror. Amazing lyricism, but just way different from You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter. And I think the thing that was a little bit disappointing for a lot of people is that they were really expecting something more like You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter, and they got what was almost an Aphex Twin album. Like, it's just almost noise music some of the time.
the same picture.
I ended up loving the album after listening to it multiple times, but when I've heard it the first time, I didn't hate it. I was just a little confused. And so the thing is that there were rumors for years and years and years and years that there was an OG version, or there was an original version of the album that was recorded by Matt and Nabil and basically completed, but Matt scrapped it and then went back in, chopped it all up, and they released that. And Matt completely denied that for years. Like, he just said, no, that doesn't exist. And then that turned out to be a fucking lie, because in 2019, we got the OG version of Astral Rejection, which, as much as I like the 2011 version of it, I definitely am a bigger fan of the 2019 version. And that's because it feels like the album that we were supposed to get, whereas the 2011 version almost feels like a remix. It's a really weird situation. There's lots of songs that have the same lyrics and similar guitar parts.
The more personal information I reveal, the closer of friends we have to become, yeah. The more personal information I reveal, the closer of friends we have to become.
There's songs that aren't even, on the 2011 version that are on the 2019. My favorite ones on the OG version, as it were, are probably Party at the Moon Tower. And Zenith Anniversary Stab. As well as Reborphin.
You are like a grain of sand. Can you speak another language so each of us can understand?
And those just hit perfectly. They gel so well with the original sound that the band had created, but they also feel like a proper evolution for the band as well. Like, you can tell that their musicality and their performance skills and their production overall had just, exponentially increased within the 2 years. And listening to that album just kind of feels like being in an alternate universe where things are just a little bit brighter, So I am grateful that we got that album. After the release of the original version of Astral Rejection, Matt basically went straight back to work and just started cranking out songs. He was working on an album called
Caterpillar Sex.
And if you think Astral Rejection is weird with its experimental style,
Caterpillar Sex
is on a whole other level. The songs that were put out by Matt, their demos, they were only put out on YouTube so far, are a lot more like funk inspired and more just straight up harsh noise music. Lots of really non sequitur parts. Not so many like breakdowns or anything like that, but it's just like super ahead of its time. I'm not gonna just say like, oh, it's weird, I hate it, because I don't. I was just like, when I listened to it, I was like, this is way different than anything else I've ever heard. I just find it funny because now there are all these bands that make music that sound like those
Caterpillar sex.
demos. I genuinely feel like the mix of rap and hardcore, metal, synths, all of that it's hyperpop. That's what hyperpop is. And maybe these bands that are coming out now, like Scene Queen and Echo 2K and 100 Gex, and Food House, weren't inspired directly by I Set My Friends on Fire, but honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if at least at some point they had heard them. You can listen to a ton of songs off of Astral Rejection or
Caterpillar sex.
demos and be like, wow, this sounds like this was released a month ago.
These feelings go into my head. I'm thinking things I shouldn't say. You psycho me inside my room. I couldn't go. I had to chill.
How was that? How it doesn't ever get any sooner, but it's still fucking growing. I know it grows. Say AI.
Speed half 10 straight to download. It's that 5G that's on my phone. You know 5G that mind control, and everybody is so troll.
Like, you listen to My Paralyzed Brother taps along to the song, whatever the fuck it's too long. The song name is too long. Or My Little Cabbage Planetarium. And you're like, wow, this sounds like 100 Gex. Like, it's insane. So after the release of the
Caterpillar sex.
demos, Matt also collabed with a rapper named Johnny Tiger. I've never heard of anything else that he's done, but they did put out a pretty fire cover of My Way, the Fetty Wap song. Matt also did release a rough version of a cover of Danny Glover by Young Thug, which was also pretty good. I just wish that the production quality on it was better, if I'm being 100% honest. But after that little brief solo stint, well, not brief, it was about 5 years, in around 2016, Matt Mihana formed a new lineup for I Set My Friends on Fire, including members of the band The Bunny the Bear that had recently quit. And they dropped the track My Uzi Holds 100 Rounds Conscience, as well as a video for that song.
If you're confused about where you're placed, I'm gonna have to reach for my way.
Matt did say that they are planning to release a version of
Caterpillar
at
sex.
some point, as well as an album with the newer lineup. But as of right now, the most recent full release, aside from the OG version of Astral Rejection, was an EP with Little Lotus called Online Now, which is also really great. It's a nice little trap hop album with some really great samples of other bands on there. It's more a Little Lotus EP than an I Set My Friends on Fire EP, but the cover of Things That Rhyme with Orange is really great. I honestly love the whole thing, and I can't reference a single song that I think that I don't like by I Set My Friends on Fire. I will say that probably the most notable thing that I Set My Friends on Fire has done recently is that a couple years ago they had an infamous beef with the When We Were Young festival. If you guys know what that is, basically it was a festival where it was a bunch of these old emo and scene bands were going to get together and basically do like a huge Warped Tour style thing. And I Set My Friends on Fire was probably one of the only bands that was not picked to play. So what they did is they bought the website domain for When We Were Young Fest, And then they just started trolling the shit out of the festival runners and making fun of the bands that were picked over them. And then they even threatened to play their own festival in the parking lot or like across the street from the festival. And it was a great saga. I mean, it was like 2 or 3 straight months of them just messing with these people. They still haven't gotten on the lineup for When We Were Young Fest, and I don't think they will, but who fucking needs that shit anyway? The influence of I Set My Friends on Fire can really be seen in a lot of newer bands. I mean, there are, of course, other contemporaries that you can look to, like the number 12 Looks Like You, Sky Eats Airplane, Eat Me While I'm Hot, and Heavy Heavy Low Low. But I feel like all of those bands kind of pale in comparison to what I Set My Friends on Fire did. As I had mentioned, a lot of the more experimental tracks off of
Caterpillar Sex
and Astral Rejection feel like things that would be put out today by a lot of these other, hyper pop bands. Now it's, pretty commonplace, especially with artists like Little Peep and Juice WRLD and Trippie Redd, to have the combination of emo and trap and hip hop. But really, around the time that I Set My Friends on Fire was doing it, nobody else was doing it. And I think that the blend that they hit on was perfect. It's not like every single song they did was a hip hop song. But the ones that they did release are still listenable to this day, unlike some of the other bands that were putting out shit like Broken Side. Curve.
And they're like, what the fuck, kid, you're a fucking freak. And it's like I can't wear some tight jeans and a tight tee with.
Oh my god, what is that?
Like if I try to listen to like Freaks or Rocket Ship to the Moon, I would just want to stab my eardrums out with a steak knife. But I mean, I'll listen to Crank That anytime, I'll listen to the Danny Glover cover, My Way, any of the hip hop songs. The Hardcore 2-Step original track they put out is pretty great too. I did mention that there was an interview with Nabil that came out fairly recently, and that did come out in 2021. I will also go ahead and link it in the bio below. And, he doesn't really seem to be doing a whole lot of music work, at least that I'm aware of, but he has been working as a colorist in LA, which is just awesome to hear that he's pursued his passion and he's doing something that he really loves and that he's able to get work in an industry that's as competitive as, the film industry. As of 2024, I Set My Friends on Fire is still touring. There is still no release date for
Caterpillar Sex
or the other album that they had announced with the newer lineup. But just last year in 2023, there was a single that Matt released with Buried Alive. And it is awesome. I think it's a great collaboration, and I really hope they team up for more songs in the future.
You're singing up time in a slightly evil tone. What do you think about when you're alone? Ever think about leaving home?
And in addition to that, Matt runs his own clothing brand. As far as, what the future holds for I Set My Friends on Fire, there are a million different directions that you could take. They could break up tomorrow. Matt could decide to just go solo and continue to release music by himself. Or the band could keep playing music and eventually we'll get those albums that were released. But let's say the worst case scenario happens and they break up. We still have 2 amazing albums and countless other tracks by this band that a lot of people just considered a joke around the time that it came out. And I think that Matt Mihana is really inspiring, and the band as a whole is really inspiring to me because it made me feel like I could do the music that I wanted to do. It influenced me a lot, and I still listen to them constantly, and I still see that other people really remember them fondly and love them. So I'm really hoping that we get those 2 albums, but even if we don't, I am so grateful that we did, because there are plenty of bands that don't release anything past 1 EP or 1 album, and we just kind of forget about them. This video was a lot of work for me, so I appreciate you guys watching. I really hope that you learned something new, or maybe even found a new band to listen to. If you enjoyed it, please, please, please go ahead and, give it a like, or, I love feedback. Comments are always great. I had a lot of technical difficulties trying to figure out how to do this format because I'm not used to video essays. But if it's something that you want to see in the future, please let me know, because I had a lot of fun talking about this band and doing the research. And there are so many other bands out there that I would love to talk about in the future as well. So if this video does well, if you like it, I'll definitely be putting out more of that content. Hopefully I'll be putting out some more film content soon. And of course I'll be continuing with my series, The Opening Hour, where I play, just older video games for fun, and it's a little bit more freeform. But I appreciate you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.